Welcome to the Soul Happy Success Show. I am your host and coach, Rebecca Nesbitt. What is up? And we are coming to you today with a twist on our regular show. We're introducing an interview series. It's exciting. And I am so excited to welcome our first guest. I could think of no one better. I have a completely biased opinion towards intuitive nutrition coach and my personal health inspiration, Renata Trebing. Renata is here today to talk all about her journey, being an advocate for women's health, and your superpower. I'm just going to leave that there, just as a nugget. You're going to want to stay till the end because also we're going to have a sneak peek into her October 5th masterclass in the CEO crowd. With that, Renata, what is up? Welcome. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Oh my gosh, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. Like I said, I could think of no one better. I will 100% forever be biased towards you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Welcome. But for people that don't know you, because I'm aware that my biased opinion comes from knowing you as a human being and being completely deeply in love with you. Let's just put it out there right at the very beginning.
That's fine. Yeah.
I would love for you to share with the listeners, with people that are invested in this show, what your entrepreneurial journey has looked like thus far.
Yes. Well, this is a fantastic question because I did not start out as an entrepreneur. So I actually got a degree in chemical engineering and then worked as an engineer in the oil and gas industry for like 12 years before I actually got laid off. And so this was during the downturn in 2009 here in the States. And what was really funny was I'd had my nutrition coaching business and blog for about a couple of years before I was laid off. And that was really my passion. That was the thing that I felt super connected to. And I just knew like this, ultimately, if I could earn a living from this, this is what I would really want to be able to do. And I kept saying to the universe, like, just give me a sign. Like, I just really want to know, like, should I do this? And what was really funny was because of the downturn at the company I was working at, they asked me to come into the office. My manager did at the time. And then he told me that they were going to lay me off. And what was really interesting was in that moment, I recognized that that was my sign. And so when he told me that I was being laid off, my immediate reaction was to laugh because I was like, oh, universe, you did it again. And so I'm sure that that manager was very perturbed by that particular response. But that's basically when I decided to dedicate more time to my business because obviously I had freed up time and space during the day. I also at the time had two 2-year-olds, and so I was homeschooling them. So it was allowing me to come back to my roots, to come back to my family, to be able to come back to what was really making me feel fulfilled. And from that moment, was when I really started to dive even deeper into nutrition coaching specifically for women and be able to serve them in a really powerful way. So with one-on-one coaching, with group coaching, and then built that up over time, because that was where I truly believe the most impact can be made for women specifically. I think so many of us, especially during COVID, felt that we were looking after literally everybody else all of the time. Like we were homeschooling the kids, like I mentioned, but we're also cooking for them, cleaning for them. We're trying to keep them quiet while our spouses or partners are on the phone, and then vice versa. I mean, we're literally like lysoling every single ingredient that comes into the house, trying to protect everyone from getting sick. And I really distinctly remember one of my really good mom friends called me during COVID, and she was like, I literally have no idea how to look after myself anymore. I'm looking after literally everyone else, and I have no idea. And so that was another big turning point for me to focus on women because we have been so conditioned to give to everybody else that we leave nothing for ourselves. And for me, self-care is really the lens in which I see nutrition, because when we look at it as that way of filling up our own proverbial cups, it makes everything easier. It makes life easier. It makes decisions about food easier. It makes decisions about working out easier because it really is something to nurture and nourish, not just your body, but also your mind and your spirit too.
Oh my gosh. I know this is a strange tangent to take this.
Yeah.
But back in 2009, where I don't believe this was very common of the world. You were like, oh, universe. Like, I feel like that now we're like, oh, yeah, it's the universe. But I feel like you've been invested in the energetic and spiritual side of this for such a long time, too. Like, where did that inspiration come from?
Great question. So I grew up in a Muslim family. So there was always like that religious aspect of it. And then as I moved out on my own, it wasn't necessarily something that I continued to practice, but I believed in like a higher power. I believe in like energy and vibes. I believe in, you get a good sense of a person without them having to speak, like just being able to see like what kind of energy is this person bringing to the table, so to speak. So I think as I started to start my side hustle, I really got into a group of women that are amazing. And they started to teach me a little bit more about, the power of understanding energy, the power of being able to use your intuition to really build up who you are as a person. So for instance, trusting yourself, as well as to be able to make decisions, whether it's in your business or personally, because you really do have a good sense of the vibe of another person or the vibe of a project, and doing things that feel really in alignment. So it was a practice from when I started becoming an entrepreneur way back when it was just a side hustle.
It's amazing. That's brand new information to me, and I love it. I love it. And I believe that that filters so deeply into the work that you do now. How incredible. How incredible.
Yeah.
So I know that you've spoken a little bit about what really inspired you in terms of supporting women specifically. And I know that that goes a little bit deeper than just saying, and this is not to diss anyone else in the industry, we love you too, like we're all here to be in this together, but you're not just saying, oh, I'm a nutritionist for women. There's a deeper level of this that looks at the power of the menstrual cycle. And I just love listening to you when you speak about this. And I know that we all need to hear it. So I would love to hear your take on this specific part of women's health that I think is really glossed over by so many other people. And with no disrespect to them, I think this is genuinely one of your superpowers to share this. So I would love to hear your insights into the power of the menstrual cycle.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. And I would agree with you. So to really like set the stage, what I want to say first is a question. And that is, how did you first learn about your menstrual cycle? I'd be really curious to hear that. And I'll share my experience as well.
Me specifically, it was not spoken about. It was not spoken about at all. I don't even remember what it was like. I just remember having a very awkward conversation with my sister because my parents were really busy and I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I believe, I'm really fortunate. I grew up in an age where the internet was there and there were very few people talking about it, but I learned what I needed to do to not have my period all over my own clothes, and that's as far as my information went. No one told me anything about hormones, how to work with my cycle, what it meant for me. It was really shameful. It was something we just didn't talk about. It wasn't polite conversation, so I had zero idea about any of this until maybe 2 years ago was when I started to think, oh, there's maybe more to this. And then if the listeners had not guessed, Renata's like one of my best friends. So obviously I now know a lot more, but that's probably only been in the last year. So that would be my experience.
Yeah. And you're not unlike me. So growing up, I have a family where I have an older sister and a younger sister. So I'm the middle child. Ooh, middle children. We didn't talk about periods in our house, even though there are obviously lots of daughters and a mom. So what was really interesting was I learned about the menstrual cycle from other girls at my school in elementary school, I believe. We were on like a sleepaway camp, and then they were talking about how you bleed, quote, down there. And I was like, what does that mean? Does it mean that I'm dying? Like, it's like that scene in My Girl where she's like, I'm hemorrhaging, and she has to go to her dad. Do you remember that? Yeah. but that's not uncommon. I believe it's like 70 to 80% of women learned about the menstrual cycle not in a way that was conducive to having a positive experience. And there's so many horror stories that I've read, upon doing all this research about the stigma around the menstrual cycle. I mean, there are girls that have written blog posts that said like they didn't want to tell their mom that they had their menstrual cycle, and so what they did was they basically just used toilet paper for a year instead of having any kind of menstrual cycle products. And there's so much, as you mentioned, like shame and negative emotion tied in with the menstrual cycle. It really sets us up for failure, quite frankly. Like it sets us up to have this ongoing belief that you have to be in pain. It sets you up with this ongoing belief that you have to hide it, that you can't talk about it, that you talk about it with your OB-GYN when you're getting ready to be pregnant, right? It's all of these hidden away atmospheres around the menstrual cycle. And when I started to learn about cycle syncing, which is basically when you aim to build your lifestyle around the different phases of your cycle, that was so freeing to me, because I always felt like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be the same every single day. I'm supposed to have the same level of emotion. I'm supposed to have the same level of energy. And inevitably, that's not what us as women are designed to be able to do. Like, we're so beautifully designed to be able to have these cycles and to live within those cycles. And yet, based upon, kind of the male type structure that we're typically growing up in, we're expected to be the same every day, which is more similar to a male hormonal cycle where they do have a 24-hour shift. So that's really, really interesting to know. And one of the really funny stories from learning about my cycle and really diving deep into it was I was actually having an argument with my husband. And he was like, I feel like every 3 weeks we have a really bad fight. And I don't understand why. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's why. So it was like affecting my relationships. It was affecting my lifestyle. And so I finally decided, let me learn about this. Let me just see if this resonates. And I was astounded to find that everything resonated with me. It made me feel like I'm not crazy. And so many women say that to me. They're like, I feel like I'm crazy. I feel like I have these mood swings, which might not really be mood swings. It might be just your natural tendency as your mood shifts and changes throughout your cycle. But it gives, when you understand it, it gives you this freedom that you can actually release. You can take a sigh out because you understand these are the reasons why my body is changing, why my mood and energy might be changing. And that's okay. That's actually how I'm designed to be. So leading into that menstrual cycle is, in my words, a superpower. Because instead of working against yourself all the time, trying to be the same all the time, you're actually leaning into the strengths of all of those different phases and understanding this is actually an activity better suited for the menstruation phase, let's say. And so let me do that during that time as much as possible. Now, obviously, we want everyone to know about the menstrual cycle. We want men and others to be able to understand it because it just makes us better human beings, because we become more compassionate. We start to understand our spouses, our partners, our coworkers, our neighbors a little bit better because we have that understanding. And that's really the main thing. So while I am a huge advocate for women's health and making sure that women understand their menstrual cycle, it's equally important for us to share this information with people that don't menstruate, because we want everyone to really lift each other up, to be kind and understanding of each other, to create a better community for us all.
Oh my gosh, I could listen to you talk about this all day. Yes, absolutely. And I think what you're saying there that is so key is one of the most incredible things is that my husband understanding my menstrual cycle. It's been one of the biggest gifts that I've learned through learning from you, because he now gets it. And he's also the first one to point it out a lot of the time. So we can have as much self-awareness as we want. I know so I seed cycle, and I know that Renata has a lot of information on this. So follow her Instagram at Nourish with Renata. But I think that when I'm seed cycling, then I'm like, oh, I know what phase I'm in, and I like to run my life and my business in accordance with that. But sometimes I do forget about that emotional piece. And my husband's the first one to say, it's okay. It's okay. Like, that on your period right now, right? Of course, this is okay. Of course, you're going to have less energy. And then I'm like, oh, yeah. So I think that the more people that can have an understanding, the better. Because then there's just, I think when you want to make a change in anything, give it more touch points, give it more intention. And the more people that are aware, the more touch points naturally that you're going to have. So key for everyone to understand this, but also would love a little whip round from you. If someone had never heard any of this information before and they're still living with our old stories of the you're going to bleed down there, what does this mean? I think it's a scene from Carrie that comes to my mind personally, or that have kind of felt all of this shame and now they're thinking, wow, this information really is a game changer. What are the phases and how can you best work with them?
Yeah. So this is really the crux of everything that I teach. So this is going to be so awesome and powerful, guys. So make some notes. Uh, so the first phase that I want to focus on is the most obvious, and that's the menstruation phase. So that's when you're actively bleeding, and that should be your telltale sign that you're in the menstruation phase. So this can last anywhere from 3 to 7 days. This is typically when your energy and emotions are at their lowest, right? Because your hormones are at their lowest. And by hormones, I'm speaking about estrogen and progesterone, which have very different functions and are also super important to consider, especially if you're experiencing things like PMS symptoms. So understanding that the menstruation phase happens at this particular time, it's really good to do more self-reflective exercises. So this could be journaling, this could be meditation. This is also the time for lots of self-care. So this is not typically the time for pushing yourself to run a marathon. It's not typically the time for doing lots of like HIIT activities or for, just really pushing yourself mentally, physically, emotionally. We really want to create space and time here to be able to slow things right down and fill up our proverbial cups. So that's the menstruation phase. Then once your bleed phase, so I use the term bleed phase and menstruation phase in conjunction, they mean the same thing. So once that bleed phase ends, we have our follicular phase. And so it's called follicular phase because it's talking all about the follicles that produce the eggs. And so we see a particular hormone called the follicular stimulating hormone increase during this time because obviously the reproductive system is built so that we aim or we can try to become pregnant if we so wish. And so we obviously want that follicular stimulating hormone to make sure that there's an egg ready if we want to become pregnant. So during this time, we start to see those particular hormones increase. And so estrogen primarily, which is your growth hormone, starts to increase during this time. As a result, we have a little bit more energy. We find that it's coming up. We have also a little bit better emotions. We start to find that that's increasing as well. So this is a really great time for lots of planning, like what do I really want to do? What are those projects I really want to get like a kickstart on? But then also remembering that during this particular phase, we might find that our hunger levels are a little bit less, and that's normal. So because we have so much more energy, because our hunger levels are a little bit less, you might also find that you're bloating. Like if you experience bloating or puffiness, it tends to go down during this time because once again, if we come back to the reproductive cycle, like we're getting ready to come into ovulation, which is when we would want a partner to be able to do that. So this is really interesting. And then for women specifically, also making sure that you're eating enough protein. So protein is going to help with energy levels. So I always like to look at each of the phases and figure out like what are foods that would be really supportive during this particular time so that you actually make the most of that particular phase. So that's the follicular phase. And then, like I mentioned, we're coming into the ovulatory phase, which is our third of the 4 phases. Obviously, this is when the egg is released, when you ovulate. And usually this is typically for women, the second most common thing that they start to track. So if you're into cycle tracking, or if you're thinking about it, cycle tracking doesn't just mean when you're bleeding. Sometimes women get into it because they want to become pregnant, so they need to know when they're ovulating. But really tracking all of these 4 phases is important because it gives you a better understanding of how your emotions and energy do shift. For instance, too, you might notice changes in bowel movements. You might notice changes in sleep or how well you manage stress. And all of these things play a big part in understanding how you transition from one phase to the other. So going back to the ovulatory phase, the eggs released, you have about a 5-day window to be able to, will basically have the highest possibility of becoming pregnant. So this is when you will have like your highest energy, your highest emotions. Obviously, great time for date nights, great time for networking, great time for if you want to pitch yourself for a promotion or, you know, present a project to a group. That is a fantastic time for doing so. And even like at the end of your follicular phase, you'll find that your energy levels are at a point where you're feeling really good about yourself. You verbalize yourself well. You might feel like your skin looks really awesome. Like these are all great signs that you're at the follicular phase or into your ovulatory phase. So with ovulation and beyond, we actually find that women have a little bit harder of a time staying hydrated. So we want to make sure that we're really focusing on our hydration because we have lots of this go, go, go energy. So it's really important to nourish your body and hydrate well. And then the fourth and final phase is, of course, the luteal phase. And this is when we start to see hormones coming down if we're not pregnant. So we're starting to see estrogen coming down. We're starting to see progesterone, which once peaked. So progesterone helps you to get ready for pregnancy, but if you're not pregnant, it's going to come down again. Progesterone is that anti-anxiety hormone. And so if you find that your hormone starts to increase before your bleed phase, that's why. And we want to manage that with progesterone supportive foods. And so basically what that means are things with lots of zinc in them, which is really helpful for managing your progesterone levels. And like you talked about earlier, seed cycling is one way to do that. So for seed cycling, it's basically a couple of seeds that you take every day. It does shift. So in terms of the seed types, it does change based upon the phase. That's really important to remember because each phase needs slightly different supportive elements. So that's why the seeds change. But that's a really amazing way to stop your progesterone from dropping too low so that you don't feel tons and tons of anxiety. So that's basically all the 4 phases and how things are shifting and changing, how your energy levels and emotions can change. And there's lots of awesome tools that we can use, such as nutrition, to help us lean into each of those phases and really work with our strengths for each of those phases too.
I mean, that was just all the golden nuggets in a mini masterclass in under 10 minutes. That's magical, amazing. And I think I'm very fortunate that I've heard this information a lot, but I don't think you can hear it enough because I think that coming back to, we are really conditioned to be in this 24-hour male cycle. To learn something different, like I was also saying before, you need more touch points. Like you need to be filling your feed on Instagram with Renata, is all I'm saying. But you need to be filling your feed, you need to be filling your conversation with this information so that you remember it. It's almost like, in a weird way, it's almost like learning a new language. You're learning a whole new language for your body that is so different to how you've potentially lived up until this point. And it's so telling. And I know that you always say this, is that science is now saying that this is the 5th vital sign.
Yes, 100%. Isn't that fascinating too? Like how many times have we not talked about the menstrual cycle and then been like, oh, actually it's the 5th vital sign. So what does it really mean? It just means that our menstrual cycle and how we are responding to things going on in our lives actually helps us to understand things like, are we getting close to perhaps being diagnosed with diabetes or heart conditions or stress-related conditions like high blood pressure? And so I love knowing that information because information is power. But even more than that, transformation comes from implementation. And so what's really cool is in our workshop, not only are we going to have the education, we're also going to talk about how we actually implement this on a daily basis. So it's not just something cool that you heard once on a podcast, it's actually how you live your life. It's not just a checkbox, it's actually who you are. And that's what I love about health, because it's not just about trying to get the six-pack abs or like trying to have like crazy like arm definition, which is great if that's what you're into. But ultimately being healthy is on all the levels of a human being. And we do that by implementing the things that we learn.
100%. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. This has been absolute gold. People need to know, I say this to Renata all the time, it's a disservice when people do not know you. People need to know, how do they get in touch with you?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for saying that. So definitely the best place to hang out with me is on Instagram. My handle is at nourish_with_Renata. I also have my website, which is nourishwithrenata.com. And there's tons of recipes and resources on there, as well as my 20-minute free consultation. So that's a fantastic way to dive deeper into your cycle health and to be able to understand, hey, how do I want to move forward in a way that feels really good for me with my health journey?
Because something, side note, that I have come up against with a few of my friends that 20-minute consultation could be so valuable for is, what if you don't have a regular menstrual cycle? What if you are on certain types of birth control? So if you feel like, oh, this doesn't actually make sense for me, it probably still does. And
Yes,
it's
it
worth,
does.
it's absolutely worth having that 20 minutes, because oh my goodness, like 20 minutes to change your life. Yes, please. If I didn't get this all the time, I'd be like, sign me up, but here we are. So thank you so much. Definitely get in touch with Renata. All of her information will be in the description of this show. And to conclude our chat today, I know that we just gave a little sneak peek into your upcoming masterclass, but I would like a little bit more of a sneak peek. I'm just one of those kinds of people where I'm like, you're going to give me an inch, I'm going to take a mile. So I'd love to know a little bit more about what is upcoming in your CEO Crowd Masterclass, which will be on the 5th of October. Renata, please take it away.
Yes. Well, just like we talked about today, I'll go into each of the 4 phases of the cycle once again, but we'll dive deeper into it. And what I'm going to do for each of those phases is tell you about tools for implementation. So, in addition to nutrition, which is a huge one for me, we're also going to talk about lifestyle. So, what things you incorporate in your lifestyle to help lean into the power of that phase? We'll talk about things like workouts. We'll talk about things like business, like what are the best things for you to do in your business during each of the phases of your cycle, which I think is so cool and awesome. Yes, amazing. And then I definitely want to make sure that I'm including lots of time for Q&A, because like you mentioned, so many women's journeys with their menstrual cycles are completely unique, right? And part of what we want to do is bring these women together so they don't have to feel alone. So you can have a unique experience, but it doesn't need to be isolating. And so maybe, like you said, lots of women also ask, if I don't have a regular menstrual cycle, what do I do? We can also look at, what could it mean if you don't have a regular menstrual cycle? Like how is stress affecting your cycle? How is perhaps a hormone imbalance affecting your cycle? And so we'll look at that. We'll probably talk a little bit about testing, because that's really important as well. And the other thing that I want to make sure of is that I give lots of resources. So things like cycle trackers, really, really important. There's lots of apps available online, and you can do it on a piece of paper, but getting into the details of like, what are my particular symptoms? How can I really start to recognize that perhaps on day 20 is when I have my lowest energy, and I just need to make sure I set up my life so that I work with that instead of feeling like a failure on day 20. So there's going to be lots of amazing tips and tidbits and things to take home and really start to put into your life to work with your cycle.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be gold. It's going to be gold. And I can say from personal experience, living and working in alignment with my cycle, and by working, I mean working my business in alignment with my cycle, has completely changed my outlook on my business. It takes a lot of the, I want to say, the shame or the guilt of not doing 100 things when I'm on my period and all of my hormones, like you said, are on the floor. I take a lot more time for that self-care. I have a really super busy second Friday of every month. And when I'm on my period in that time, because it happens, then I'm able to incorporate so much more self-care into that day, where I'm literally just like, self-care call, self-care call, self-care call. And I wouldn't have known to do that. I would have been one of those people that just kept pushing through it and used all of the motivational nuggets in my tool belt to push, push, push. And then I believe that's where burnout starts to exist.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who wants to combat burnout, who wants these tools to implement, then come along to the masterclass on the 5th of October. We are so excited to have you as our first teacher. I can't even tell you. Renata will be our first guest teacher in the CEO crowd. all the links that you need to join the CEO crowd, as well as how to connect with Renata, are in the description. Finally, a huge thank you. You can't even, from the bottom of my soul, believe how big this thank you is to Renata for being here today and for coming to the masterclass and delivering such value for us. I just know it's going to be magical. So thank you in advance.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me today. I cannot wait for the masterclass. It's going to be epic. It's going to be so good.
Oh, it's going to change lives. It's going to change lives. It's going to be huge. I love it. And to all of the women, to the listeners who stayed to the end, until next time, we'll be over here believing in you. And we know that you've got this.